On behalf of the American Australian Association, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this immigration update. I'm Louisa Teo, Regional Director of the Association's New England chapter, based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the land each of us is on, including New York and Boston. I pay respect to elders, past, present, and emerging, of the Wampanoag and Lenape people, and recognize their continued connection with land, water, and community. And now I'm absolutely delighted to welcome and introduce Zjantelle Cammisa Markel, super lawyer, and our special guest today. Zjantelle was born and bred in Adelaide, but she spent so long in the US that I'm not sure whether to refer to her as an Aussie or a New Yorker. Zjantelle has processed thousands of visas for individuals with backgrounds just like those of you in our audience today. For me personally, I arrived in this country on an F1 student visa before transitioning to one of the early E3s, and now I'm on a green card. And personally, I have found at times the immigration process onerous and a little complex. So it's a great comfort to have somebody like Zjantelle in our network who can help us navigate the system, especially during a time of uncertainty and anxiety. I'm going to hand the program over to Zjantelle. She's going to run through a presentation, and then we're going to address some of the excellent questions that came in from you, our audience members, prior to this session. Thank you.
Louisa, thank you for such a glowing introduction. That's so nice. So yes, as you said, the goal of tonight is to hopefully ease some of the anxiety of our viewers by answering the questions that came in. I did look at all the questions, and what I did was to approach trying to answer almost all of them. I developed some content that addresses the main areas of where the questions come in. And then for the questions where there weren't enough to develop, content and slide pages, I think you're going to ask some questions to those at the very end, so that way we will have tried to answer almost all the questions, if not in a direct way by answering the specific question, but the answer should be within the content. So where we saw the main questions come in was in relation to the E3 visa and whether people can apply for it, extend their visa, apply for a change of employer, or apply to change status to E3 from within the US. And what does that look like? Can I stay here? I really don't want to travel right now. How do I do this from within the US? There's been an outpouring of questions about that. Similarly, for the people that do want to travel or that have determined that filing in the US might not be the best for their situation, the questions come in on where can I go? What consulates are open? When are the consulates opening? What do I have to think of if I go abroad and try to consulate process my E3? So we'll cover that. Then we'll cover a little bit, there were a few questions on the presidential proclamation, so I'll touch on that, the two presidential proclamations. Then the main category that we've seen affected of our Australian expats with the presidential proclamations is the effect that it's had on the diversity visa lottery. And we did have a lot of questions on that. So I will address that and the situation there. Then I'll talk about, while a lot of our viewers aren't directly impacted by the presidential proclamation for their green card processes, we will touch on how some green cards have been affected with the significant delays and visa appointments being cancelled, what's happening with those. There were a lot of questions about EADs, so we'll cover that. And lastly, there were questions about green card holders, our Australians that do hold green cards, who have gone abroad and now they're concerned with not coming back so quickly, and will that affect their green card? How can they preserve their green card? Are they going to lose their green card? So I will touch on that to finish, and then we'll go to your questions. So why don't we now go to our slides, and I will share my screen, which hopefully I can do. There we go. You can see that, Louisa?
Okay, Zjantelle.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, so here we go. Let's talk about filing for your extension of E3 or a change of employer to E3 in the US. How do you go about that? What are the things you need to think about if that's what you're wanting to do to decide whether it is the right option for you? So can you file from within the US? Yes. Simple answer to that is yes, you can. And the way you do that is by filing an I-129 E3 visa petition to USCIS. And that's filed by your employer. So unlike when most of our viewers are used to going to consulates abroad to apply for their visa, and that's a visa application made by the person applying for the visa. Whereas when we're filing from within the US, it's the employer that's actually making the petition on your behalf. So we have one difference right there to start with. Just to note, with respect to changing status, if you're in the US and you're saying, well, can I change status to E3 from within the US? Yes, you can do that as well by filing the I-129 petition, except if you've come in ESTA. So if you're in ESTA status, you cannot file to change status to E3. The only option will be to leave and consular process the visa. But if you're in B or L or O and you've determined an E3 is better for you and you want to change to the E3 and you're here on a valid visa status, you can file and do that in the US. So let's see, what do we need to consider if we're going to be filing within the US, because we don't want to travel right now. We don't want to deal with quarantine. We don't want to deal with travel restrictions. You know, I don't want to get COVID. I don't want to travel because I'm so scared of COVID. So is filing I-129 right for me? What do I need to think about? So the first thing I normally do with a client that says that to me is I say, okay, let's see how strong your case is to file it as an I-129 petition within the US. First thing I look at is what's the job, what's the position that you're going to be filling in that petition. Then I look at the size of the company and the revenues of the company, because those factors are important too. And the reason those factors are important is it determines how easily and how quickly, even though it's not so quick right now, your petition might get approved. So you can make a decision timing-wise whether you're going to pursue this. Because if USCIS does question the position or the size of the company or the revenues of the company, what they do is they issue a request for evidence. So let's look at what could trigger a request for evidence with respect to the specialty occupation, the position that you're filling. So let's talk about this. So when you're filing an I-129 petition in the US, unlike the consulate abroad, your petition is being adjudicated by USCIS. And that's a different government agency to Department of State who adjudicates your E3 visa application when you apply for it at a consulate abroad. The officers at USCIS that adjudicate your E3 are usually the officers that adjudicate H1Bs, and H1Bs have a specialty occupation requirement too. And so the way they look at the specialty occupation for an E3 is that they use the rules for the H1B. And so USCIS has taken a very narrow approach as to what a specialty occupation is. Their approach is, does this position require a degree in one specific field? And what they do is they go to look at a resource called the Occupational Outlook Handbook, otherwise known as the OOH. And if the OOH lists multiple degrees that could be used for that position, then they typically say, well, maybe this isn't a specialty occupation because you could have a degree in business or mathematics or in economics for this role. And so therefore, it's not a occupation that requires a degree in one specific field. So that means it's not a specialty occupation. So I look at the position first and I say, right, is this a position that can only be done with a degree in one specific field? Because if it is, then we probably won't get an RFE on specialty occupation. So those positions that are good for filing an I-129 without getting an RFE are positions like attorney, dentist, nutritionist, accountant, architect. So because you can't be the only degree you can have to be an attorney is a law degree. The only degree you can have to be an architect is architecture. You cannot do it with a degree in landscaping to be an architect, to be a certified architect. You need to have a degree in architecture. So those are great examples of cases that USCIS will not question whether this is a specialty occupation. Where we've seen USCIS question specialty occupations are occupations where they could have multiple degrees to do that job. So a very popular one for RFEs is the position of CEO. So if we have a CEO, I'll typically ask the beneficiary, is there anything else? Is there any other position you also hold that is the primary position? Even COO is a better role than a CEO. And the reason that they don't like CEO is that they say, well, look, you could have any number of degrees to be a CEO, depending on the company you're in. You might have a marketing degree, you might have a business degree, you might have a degree in international relations, you might have a degree in business, you know. So because of that, they say, well, that's not necessarily a specialty occupation, so prove to us that it is. Other typical ones where we've seen RFEs come up is financial analyst, because you could have a degree in mathematics, economics, accounting, you know, to be a financial analyst. PR specialist roles, because the OOH says you could have a degree in communications or journalism or marketing or advertising to be a PR specialist. So therefore, it's not a specialty occupation because it's not one specific degree for that role. So this is what you want to look at. You want to look at those things because you want to avoid, you want to file a petition that hopefully won't get an RFE, because if you get an RFE, it's going to be a long and lengthy process in getting that E3 approved. So then I say, okay, so if this is a role that looks like it's going to get, it potentially could get an RFE, and let me just clarify that, you know, if you're in one of those positions that often gets RFEs, it doesn't mean that you definitely will get an RFE. You know, sometimes it might get an approval straight out, you know, that is definitely possible, but we are seeing increasing RFEs. So if they do send you an RFE, what does it look like? What am I going to have to provide? You know, I like to tell clients, you know, the mammoth response that's going to have to go into that RFE to get that case approved. So what they ask for is information and documents to establish the 4 criteria that they say is what makes a specialty occupation. So the first thing is that the degree is give us information and documentation that shows that the degree is normally the minimum requirement for this job, that specific degree is normally the minimum requirement for this job. Give us something like the OOH. So now they've probably already cited the OOH. The OOH says a number of different degrees can be used for this, so you can't use that. So you've got to try and find some other authoritative documentation that says that only one specific degree can be used for that job. 2, they say, okay, show us this degree, this specific degree is common to the industry. So give us job postings from other financial, let's just use financial analyst as an example. Give us job postings from other companies that have hired financial analysts that say that only a degree in finance can be used for this job, and that you can't have mathematics, economics, or some other related degree. Then they will ask for, give us evidence that the degree is required because the duties are so complex. We want you to break down every single subject you studied in that degree and explain why you needed those subjects and how they relate back to every duty that you put on your support letter that you filed with your case. Then they say, okay, we also want to know that your employer normally requires the specific degree. So we want you to provide evidence that everyone that your employer has ever hired in that role had that one specific degree, or anyone that is currently there in that specific role has that degree. And then give us payroll evidence, firstly, that you had the person that was hired in that role had that degree, you know, was employed there, or the people that are currently employed there have that degree, and then give us copies of their degrees as well, because we want to make sure that you're telling the truth. So as you can see, to respond to, to provide a bulletproof response to an RFE, then you want to provide as much of that information as possible to convince them that, yes, this specific degree is required for this role. It's a specialty occupation. So that can take a lot of time. You're going, it's going to get a lot of documents from various different parties, including other companies. So what does that mean? So that means it can take a while to get this thing approved. If it's an extension petition, then it's not such a big deal, right? Because if you file an extension of an E3, you've got 240 days of continued work authorization until it either gets approved or denied. Hopefully it doesn't, but whichever is sooner, right? Someone did ask the question, I filed from within the US and it's still pending. Is it going to come through within the 240 days? Well, 240 days is 8 months. So hopefully it does. I think it should. It depends on how long you take to respond to that RFE and then how long they take to then process it, but it should. So you should get an approval. So then you should be able to work continuously until you get an approval. The people that it affects predominantly and why maybe filing in the US is not a good option is for the people that are filing to change employer in the US or filing a change of status in the US. And the reason for that is that you cannot commence working until that petition is approved. So even if you are changing status and it's with the same employer, so you might be on an O1 and changing to an E3 or vice versa, and because you've deemed that's the best option for you, even if it's with the same employer, that's not considered an extension. That's considered a change of status, and you can't start working until that change of status is approved. So what's timing looking like? So if you get it approved without an RFE, we're seeing anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks. If you do get an RFE, what does that mean? So, okay, they're not issuing, we're seeing it, total upload of 5 months. And the reason for that is because they don't issue the RFE until about 6 to 8 weeks in from receiving it. It's not like they receive it and go, oh, you know what? No, we're going to question this. I'm going to give you the RFE right now so that we can speed this up for you. No, they take their time, and when they're ready to it's either you're getting an approval or you're getting an RFE. So you get this RFE, and then they typically give you 90 days to respond. And you do need quite a good chunk of that time to develop all the documents, gather all the documents to produce a good and strong response. And then they can take their sweet time to adjudicate it. The thing to remember is that there is no premium processing for E3s either. So you can't throw $1,440 at this and say, okay, great, process this in 15 days, because it's not available to the E3 category. So what are your options then? You've got this RFE, you were hoping you were just going to get a straight approval, but you didn't. Now you've got this RFE, and now you're pretty aware that this is going to take, like, you're definitely not getting an approval now until at least another couple of months. So in that instance, or if that RFE is just really horrific, one of the options, or if you do need to travel, some people need to travel and they can't wait that long and they're going to need to travel. So if you do need to leave the US, you can decide, I'm going to leave the US and consular process this, because by consular processing it, I have a little bit more control over timing. We have worked out ways to be able to get people, well, at first we were able to get people E3 visas within a month by going back to Australia. And now we have figured out with some of the closer consulates opening and depending on the travel restrictions, in much quicker time than that, and even as quick as a week. So from traveling abroad. So let's see, what do we do? The other point that I want to make sure that you're aware of is that if you do file within the US and you get an approval, just be mindful that the next time you travel internationally, you will need to get that E3 visa put in your passport to be able to return back. So you're doing the consular processing anyway, just at a later stage when you do travel internationally. If you don't travel for 2 years, great, you don't have to do that, and you've used up the whole time on that extension or change of employer petition. Okay, great. So, right, we've decided that, I don't know, I don't have the time. I'm changing employer, I don't have the time. My employer's not going to wait potentially 5-6 months, or who knows how long, for me to start working. So if you're applying for a change of employer and your employer wants you to start relatively soon, I think that the only real option then becomes traveling to a consulate abroad. And then likewise, if you're filing an extension and you don't really want to go through that whole RFE process, and you really want that to be approved sooner, then you might decide to travel abroad, or you might need to be traveling, or you just want to travel abroad and do this process by traveling abroad. So that rose to the questions that were, are the US consulates open now? Because they were all closed. They were cancelling appointments. Can we book appointments now? You know, what else do I need to consider? What are the travel restrictions of getting to these consulates and getting back from these appointments? So just overall, the consulates have said that they're going to start opening, but we've still seen them cancel up until now the regularly scheduled appointments. So when you've scheduled just a regular appointment. So only appointments that we've seen, and this is global, being honoured are the ones that were scheduled as an emergency visa appointment. The other way that people are successfully processing their visas right now is via the mail-in Australia. And as the consulates open up, we'll also start to determine whether the mail-in becomes an option at some of the other consulates as well. But if you're doing the mail-in, you have to be in the country and where you're mailing it in. So, and there's been so many travel restrictions up until now, at least as an Australian, you can travel to Australia and back. So this takes us to the topic of, okay, if I decide to do it in Australia, what do I have to consider? So the nice thing, as I said, is that with Australia, you have no travel restrictions to enter Australia. As an Australian national, you will always be allowed to go back and enter Australia. But one thing that you do need to consider is, will you also be able to depart Australia? This is more of a consideration for people that are currently in Australia and haven't been regularly living outside of Australia. So if you're going back to Australia, you should be able to get back in, leave Australia and get back into the US, because you will be able to demonstrate that you were regularly residing outside Australia. And you'll do that by taking evidence of that, such as your lease, your utility bills, and memberships in the US. And you don't even have to apply for an exemption to leave Australia in that instance. You can apply, you can just take that evidence to the airport when you're leaving, and we have had clients who've been, granted to be able to leave, actually all of them, be able to leave and enter the US. We've had no one denied being able to leave Australia, who were able to show that they regularly reside outside the US and have evidence of that. So that's good. But it becomes more of a issue if you're a first-time E3 applicant and you're currently in Australia and you just got a job offer and you can't show that you regularly reside outside of Australia, or you're not a citizen of another country, that you can't, there are other exemptions that you might qualify to get out of Australia, and I'm not going to get into those now, but it does make it a little bit more tricky if you have not been residing in Australia. So other things you've got to consider if you're going back to Australia is quarantine, and that's also one of the reasons why a lot of people don't want to go back to Australia right now, is because that quarantine is 14 days. It's going to stay into effect, through next year. It's costly because now you've got to pay for it, and it's time consuming because you cannot, the current options that are available there in Australia to renew your visa, which is the mail-in or the emergency appointment, you can't do that during your quarantine period. You do need to sit out your quarantine, and so therefore you're already 14 days in when you start the visa process. So and then you've got to look at how you're going to attack the visa. So you could look at the mail-in as an option. So it's an option if you are applying in the same visa category. So if you've got an E3 and you're renewing your E3, that's a good, or change of employer, it's a good option for doing the mail-in. You just need to check that you're not disqualified from the mail-in for other reasons, such as if you've ever been arrested, or you've ever been denied entry, or you've ever been denied a visa, or if you've ever been denied entry to the United States. So there are a few things that you've got to just double check that mail-in, you can do that. If you do the mail-in, you do have to be in Australia. So we had that question come up. Is the mail in, can I mail it into USCIS or can I mail it from here to Australia? No. If you're going to do the mailing, you have to be in the country that you're mailing it from. And you can't mail the visa application in while you're still in quarantine. So you do have to finish the quarantine before you do the mailing. And then how long is that taking? We've seen people get their passports back from the mail-in in as little as 3 to 4 days, and as long as, I know I said 6 to 15, but I did see it come a bit quicker in early days, but I think more people are doing the mail-in now. Their website says it can take up to 15 days. We haven't seen it take that long, but we've got it there because they say it could take that long. So if you're doing the mail-in, you should plan to be in Australia for at least 4 to 5 weeks to get that process done. But at least you can tell a future employer, I know I can pretty much get a visa if everything goes according to plan and be back and working for you in about 4 or 5 weeks. At least that's something definitive, where as with the I-129, you can't give any definitive time whatsoever to a future employer. So this might be what makes you decide that you're going to go abroad and not file your I-129 in the US. So what's the other way people are getting appointments right now? So because we're still seeing those you can book regular appointments, but currently the appointments that you can book are in the earliest are in November. I don't know if they'll even honour those because we've just still been seeing globally, not only Australia, the consulates cancel the visa appointments. All the ones for August are already cancelled. So the only way that you're going to get a visa before November, and then maybe even after November, is, and if you don't qualify for the mail-in, is by requesting an emergency visa appointment. And we have been seeing those get granted. So what do you need to request an emergency visa appointment? So you can request an emergency visa appointment, by the way, for any visa category. This is not just for the E3, so I wanted to point that out too. So you want to make sure that your employer has a compelling reason to have you in the US now, that they can't wait for you. They need you in the US now. And the things that they look at is that it would cause severe financial hardship to your employer if they couldn't have you in the US now. And the other thing that they like to see is that your role in the US is going to provide a substantial economic benefit to the United States. So if you can cover those reasons in your reason for an emergency appointment, typically it will get approved. So if you get granted an emergency visa appointment, again, it's taking, you can consider you'll be in Australia for all up, and your whole visa process is going to end up taking about 4 or 5 weeks because you're going to try and get a flight to Australia. That's a bit difficult right now. So that's going to affect timing. Get to Australia, sit 2 weeks quarantine, and then either mail in or do the emergency visa appointment and get your passport back, which takes about another week, and then try and get another flight back to the US, which is, there you go, about another week. We have, the fastest we've seen someone do this, a client of ours who was just so determined, got there and got back in 3 weeks. He, the day he the morning he got out of quarantine, he had his visa application packet printed and he was approved for an emergency appointment that morning. He walked from his hotel down to the consulate. The consulate processed the visa and had the visa and passport back to him in 3 days. And then he got on the next flight and back to the US. So he was determined and he made it happen. So it's possible, but if you don't want to be so militant, then give yourself 4 weeks. Okay. So what about everywhere else? And this is, the common question that I'm having now, because a lot of people don't want to go back to Australia for all those reasons. Quarantine, it's far, it's expensive. I don't want to pay for quarantine. Are these other consulates opening up? What's happening? Bahamas, Barbados, all these places I used to be able to go to. Are they opening up? So the thing I say to my clients is, even if the consulates open up and you can get an appointment there, you've got to consider whether you can even get into that country as an Australian national, and whether you can get back to the US after having gone to that country. So, and this is changing daily. I won't even say weekly, like every 2 days, because as I was finishing up this presentation today, I checked Bahamas and it had changed from yesterday. It changed yesterday again from the day before, which was insane. So to give you, so what I look at to determine whether what the restrictions for an Australian is to get into another country is there's and we'll provide you with this so that you can go to the link. There's an IATA, which is a travel website, that it has a map of the world. And you'll be able to click on the country that you want to go to do your visa appointment, or that you're curious, can I get in there to go do my visa appointment? And it will tell you all the travel restrictions, like is it open to international travellers? And if it is, it might even say, look, we're open to people from Australia and Canada and the UK right now, but we're not open to travellers from the US. So you have to, and it might say travellers from the US, or it might say we're accepting nationals from Australia, not nationals from the US. So you're an Australian national. So you've got to really closely look at the wording to determine if you can get into a country, and then check it a lot. So, and for an example, the Bahamas, which we were hoping was going to reopen because we thought it might be nice to start sending people there because they had announced that they were going to reopen. They announced they were going to reopen in mid-July, and they did. And then last week they issued they saw COVID numbers increasing, and so they said, no, we're not letting any travellers from the US that are travelling from the US come to the Bahamas anymore. So then that was halted. We were about to try and book, see if we could get emergency appointments there, and then, well, oh no, you can't go there anymore. And then I checked it again today, and they actually reopened it to travellers coming from the US, but they put conditions around that, which is that tourists have to quarantine for 14 days at their own expense at a government facility, as well as taking a COVID test. So now, you wanted to go to Bahamas because you don't want to do quarantine in Australia in a government, run facility in Australia, but now you're going to be doing it in Bahamas. So up to you, but it's not as attractive anymore as when we thought we would be able to go there with no quarantine. One place that Australian travellers can get to and get back from right now that has been really amazing is Mexico. Some people have been nervous to go there though because COVID numbers are quite high, but we have managed to get people emergency visa appointments there, so it's quick to travel to. You can get in there only if you're travelling by air, so you cannot get into Mexico right now. Mexico is not allowing travellers to arrive by land, so you would have to fly there. You can do your emergency visa appointment, get the visa back in as little as 3 days, and fly back without restriction right now. That might change, but right now that is available. Canada right now, it might be an option if you have, we have a few expats that I know that hold dual Australian and Canadian citizenship. That's been quite common in the questions that I've seen over time. So I wanted to bring this one up. You can actually do your E3 visa appointment in Canada if you have Canadian permanent residence or Canadian citizenship. We actually have a client who has Canadian permanent residence because her husband has a Canadian passport, and she's going to be going mid-August to do her E3 appointment in Canada. Canada, actually, if you're trying to book an appointment, is only allowing people that are permanent residents or also dual citizens of Canada even book that appointment. So it's really only open to those people right now. Maybe emergency appointments they'll grant. We have not tried that yet, but these are things that we can start trying at a lot of these consulates as long as you can get into that country. So another thing that you can consider is, do you have a passport of another country when you're looking at, whether you can enter some of these countries? Do you have a passport of another country? That might open up the options of the countries that you can enter right now. So traveling back, the reason I want to bring this up is because a lot of people said, can I go to Europe? Well, it's really difficult to travel back from Europe right now, any of the Schengen countries, and they're all listed there, the ones that fall into the Schengen area. I won't read them out because I know we're in the interest of time, and including China, and Iran, the UK, the Republic of Ireland, and Brazil. So if you were to travel to any of those right now to try and do your visa, if you've determined that you can get in there, you can't travel directly back from one of those countries if you've been in there in the last 14 days. So what that means is you would have to go somewhere else to where you can travel in from and be there for 14 days before traveling back to the US. There are some exceptions to that rule of not being able to come back if you've been there in the last 14 days. Those exceptions include if you're the spouse of a US citizen or green card holder, or a parent of a US citizen or green card holder. So what I've said is, if you figured out you can get into Europe and you have a US citizen or permanent resident spouse or a US citizen or permanent resident child, you can go there, you can do, because you can get in here, and if you can get in, and then you'll be able to come back. And in fact, we do know of someone that did exactly that. He flew to Sweden. He had his wife and who's a permanent resident. Children are US citizens. Actually, I don't think his wife is not even a permanent resident. He just had US citizen children, actually. And because of his US citizen children who were still in the US, he was able to fly right back. So he did that visa in a week because he was able to get in there, get an emergency appointment granted, and he was able to come back. So you really want to look at, do I have a passport of another country? Do I have a wife or husband or kid who is a citizen or permanent resident? Because these might open up my options of where I can go. To that point of not being able to come back, if you've been in the Schengen countries or any of these countries in the last 14 days, on July 15th, the government did say, we're going to allow people, other than, even though you can come back if you're under one of those exemptions, we're going to provide another exemption, which is if your job, if you can prove to us that your job, and a consular officer agrees with this, that your job is in the national interest of the United States, then we'll also give you a waiver of that 14-day not being able to go straight back to the US that allow you to travel straight back. So this is awesome, because I'll give an example. We had a client who was here in the US, and she needed to extend her E3. Her E3 was expiring. And she said, you know what, I'm going, and consulates hadn't really opened up yet at that point. And she didn't have a strong case for filing an I-129. So she said, you know what, I'm going to go hang out in Greece for a little while. Her background is Greek, but she does not have Greek citizenship. But she flew through Canada with her 2 kids who are not US citizens to Greece. And the plan was, we said, okay, great. We'll try and get you an emergency appointment in Greece. And then what you'll do is you'll process your visa there, but then you'll just fly through Mexico or Australia or maybe Istanbul or Croatia or anywhere that's not one of these restricted countries, spend 14 days there and then come back to the US. She's like, yeah, that's a great plan. But now that as of July 15th, our plan has changed again. And we said, okay, great. When you go to your emergency visa appointment, we're going to request a waiver of that as well. So now, hopefully, you'll be able to fly straight back to the US with your kids as well. So this has definitely opened up making Europe and some of these countries an option to consider if you think you could argue that your role in the US is in the national interest of the United States. And ones that they look at are if your role is with respect to investing in the United States, or an investment in the United States, or an economic trade with the US, or it's going to make a substantial economic impact, or if you're a senior level employee who provides strategic direction or expertise essential to the success of a business that's investing in the United States. So, great. So, what do you lose by trying to explore getting an emergency appointment in a country when you've determined that you can get in there and hopefully get back out of there? So what you lose is if you have to pay the MRV fee to try and get that emergency appointment. And then if it doesn't work out and they say, no, we don't think this is an emergency, or they don't let you book an emergency appointment, then you've lost that MRV fee. You can later still go to the regular appointment there that you will have booked. But if you decide to go to a different consulate, you'll just have to pay that MRV fee again. So just wanted to point that out. So I think the overview on that is just, if you're in a time crunch, if timing is important, if you're changing employer or changing status, typically you have more control over timing if you try to go to a consulate abroad rather than filing it from within the US. If you're filing an extension and you don't want to travel, then filing an I-129 might be a good option because you can keep working, you won't be interrupted. Unless you think that your case is not strong and you don't want to deal with an RFE. So that's the summary there. No, it's a big mouthful. I'm going to not talk too much to this slide because I'm nowhere, on time, just because we've run out, not running out of, just in the interest of time. Okay, so I'm not going to go through each proclamation, but there were 2 recent proclamations. Just know that they don't affect you if you're in B, E3, E3D, E1, those categories that are listed there. It doesn't affect you, either of those proclamations. So that's good. You can sigh some relief. The people it does affect are H1Bs, people in H, L, and J status, basically. And the main questions we got in relation to this were people in H and L, and they said, can I travel? I'm on an H and an L, can I travel? Or I've got a proof for the visa, but I don't have the visa on my passport yet. Can I go get the visa? So the presidential proclamations stopped the issuance of new visas abroad to be able to come back into the US right now. So if you were in the US on the date of the presidential proclamation, then you will be able to, and you have a valid visa, you have a valid L, H, J, and it's still valid, and you need to travel internationally, and your visa will still be valid on the date that you want to come back. You can travel internationally on that visa because you don't need a new visa issued. So, and you can, if you're in the US, still continue to extend your visa status or change to one of those visa categories from within the US. So you can still file those visa categories. We just filed an change of status to L1 last week for a client, and that'll get approved and you'll be able to stay here. He just won't be able to leave to get when he next travels internationally, he'll get that visa in his passport, but he'll just have to wait until after December 31st, or unless they ease it sooner, but to get that visa put in his passport to be able to come in. So he'll be a little bit landlocked at the end of the year, but he's going to be here, he'll be able to work here. The other categories that the presidential proclamations affect are really with respect to green cards, and predominantly most of our expats are, getting married to permanent residents or US citizens. It doesn't affect people marrying US citizens at all. It affects people that are getting married to permanent residents and going through that process if they are trying to get the visa from abroad. So if you're trying to get the visa from abroad, then it will delay the process until after December of this year. If you are applying for adjustment of status, though, to marriage to a green card holder, it doesn't affect you. So just want you to know that. The biggest group that it does affect are diversity visa applicants. And so I wanted to talk to that point. And to that point, we have, what does it mean for diversity visa, and which diversity visa lottery winners does it affect? So if you won it this year, we're not going to know if it affects you until after December 31st, 2020. So for the people that are definitely affected are those that got notified that they won the 2020 DV lottery. So that means if you were notified last May 2019, those people have to have their green card interview either at the consulate abroad or by adjustment of status before September 30th, 2020. So now the presidential proclamation stopped any interviews abroad until December 31st, 2020. So you're not going to have your interview before September 30th, 2020 in that instance. So the only way that you will be able to get that green card, that diversity visa lottery green card, is if you either applied for adjustment in the US, or you can change your case to an adjustment of status from within the US now. So if you did file your case to adjustment of status in the US, then that's great, and you have the ability to, USCIS actually notified us and said that we have a big list of those and we are prioritizing those, and we're actually seeing scheduled appointments for those already. We have 3 clients that have been scheduled in August already, so that's great. If you file for consular processing, then what? Well, if you haven't gotten the visa already before April 2020, when that April 22, 2020, then you're not going to get it unless you come back to the US. Either if you're in the US, convert it to adjustment of status immediately now, or if you're outside the US, try to get back into the US and change it to adjustment of status, but you need to do that like immediately. And just to note, you have to be coming back in a status where you can file for adjustment of status, and you can't do that from ESTA or B2. So if you're outside the country but you've got a valid E3 and you've just been working out there, then and you filed your DB lottery and you're hoping that you might get an appointment, you're not going to. So come back, try and file for adjustment of status and see if you can get it that way if it's important to you. If you can't get back outside the US, you didn't get an interview and you're not going to be able to get an interview or come back before the end of September, then you're pretty much going to miss out of the green card. And there's nothing really that can be done about that. Note that if you do have the visa, if the visa was issued, another point that people need to be mindful of is if you were lucky enough to get that green card appointment outside the US before the proclamation in April, and you've got that visa sticker that allows you to enter the US in your passport, you need to use that within 6 months of it being issued. They did allow for a one-time 6-month extension of entering the US, but after that they won't. So you really, if you do have that sticker, try and get into the US as soon as possible. Also make sure that you don't lose that green card. So those are the really important points. So other updates were and questions that we got were people that have filed for their green card cases based on adjustment of status to their US citizen spouse or green card spouse, and that their appointments were scheduled but got cancelled. Are we seeing those get rescheduled? So far, they've said on June 20th, they said they're going to start recommence scheduling those. We haven't seen any of those actually get scheduled yet. I think what they're doing is trying to get through all those diversity visa adjustment of status interviews first, because they're the ones that we have seen getting scheduled. And I think as soon as they've got through those, we'll start to see the people whose visa appointments got cancelled, their green card appointments got cancelled. We'll see them get scheduled first, and then the ones that would have come after that, slowly in chronological order, get cancelled. Okay, so EADs. It's a mouthful, Louisa. EAD backlogs. We've had so many people say, I filed for my EAD ages ago. What am I going to do? I haven't got it. Why is it taking so long? So there's a few reasons why it takes so long. One is if you filed it together with a marriage case, you need to have a biometrics appointment for them to process it. And the biometrics, the centres that take your biometrics have been closed. So that's a severe backlog there. If you filed your EAD together with another petition for with the principal spouse, they have to adjudicate the principal spouse's petition and application before they then turn to you as the dependent spouse and then approving your EAD. And then with the EADs, so then we also got more information, which was on July 21st, because a lot of people were trying to get congressional assistance or complaining to the USCIS Ombudsman. And the Ombudsman notified everyone, well, another reason why these are taking so long is that USCIS has ended its contract with the company that it used to print these cards because they thought they'll use their federal employees for this. But then there was a hiring freeze on employees, and so they don't have enough employees to print these cards as rapidly as they need to. And so they've said you will see an even more backlog, and that will affect the EAD cards for people that have filed just a straight EAD card, which earlier this year we were seeing come through relatively quickly. If you were filing just a straight 765 application for a employment authorization document, EAD, we were seeing those come in about 3 months. So, but I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. So what you need to do is see if there's any other options. Maybe you could switch to a different visa class that allows you to work in that instance. Lastly, we have, for the green card holders that are quote unquote stuck outside the US, you know, they're like, what am I going to do? Am I going to lose my green card? So the thing I say to those clients, and I'm not going to go into all of the detail too much here, just give a high level overview so we can jump to your questions, Louisa. The most important thing I say is, okay, well, what's your concern? If you want to just preserve your green card, then you can stay out as long as 365 days and even longer, because you're not going to lose your green card. It's up to the, if it's less than 365 days, you will not be deemed to have, willfully abandoned your green card. And if it's more than 365 days, right now you can explain why you've been out. So it's up to the officer's discretion as to whether to even question it, but you won't lose your green card. So that's okay. But if you're concerned with getting citizenship, and that's a priority to you, and preserving your ability to file for citizenship as soon as possible, then definitely talk to your immigration lawyer, because if you stay, either one of two things, either make sure you don't have a trip more than 180 days outside the US, even if you're coming back to the US for 2 days and then going back, and then you've been out a year, but you at least, the question is, have you had a trip of 180 days or more outside the US? And as soon as you answer yes to that question, then it can affect when you qualify to apply for citizenship. So if you want to preserve your ability to apply for citizenship and you don't want to have to overcome any hurdles, make sure you're back at least every 6 months, on or before that 180th day. If you really can't get back, then how's it going to affect your citizenship? It's just going to basically delay when you're going to qualify to file for it. And that's because of a continuous presence requirement that requires you to be continuously present here and not have an absence of more than 180 days. If you do have an absence of more than 180 days, less than 365 days, then you can try to rebut that. But if you've had an absence of more than 365 days, they will say, no, you 100% broke that continuous presence. You're going to have to start your time, all over again, which is going to be either 5 years or 3 years, and you won't be able to apply until it's either going to be 4.5 years after you return or 2.5 years after you've returned. And yes, so that's what's important. So I would say, if you just care about your green card and keeping your green card, don't worry about how long you're staying out. If you're really concerned about when you can apply for citizenship, try to get back in less than 180 days. So that's it, Louisa. I'm ready for all your questions.
Thanks so much. There's a huge amount of detail and so much information for somebody to go out and find on their own. So I appreciate that you distilled all of that into a single presentation for us. Now we're going to go to some of the great questions from you, our audience members. And I want you to stick around. I know that we have people on a number of different visas, E3s, F1s, J1s in our audience. The first question, though, is about the O1 visa, which I think is a great option for Australians. Being based in Boston, Cambridge, I feel like I meet Aussies all the time in our community who would qualify for this visa. And so I encourage you to stick around. The first question is from RJ in Colorado. RJ, thanks for your question. Are O1s being affected?
This is a great question. O1s aren't necessarily being affected, but the way, actually, do you want to ask, is there more to that question? And then I can, is there another sub-question to that?
Oh, we did get a question from Emma during the session, who is a good friend of ours. Thanks for the question, Emma, as well as Rebecca Gill, who asked the same question. Is it possible to extend an O visa during COVID-19?
Great. Okay, yes. So it is possible to extend an O, and to change status to O even. And I'm glad you're bringing up the O, because in fact, it's also another option. If you qualify for an O and you've looked at your options on trying to extend your E3 and you don't like the idea of going to Australia, you don't like the idea of going abroad, and your case isn't strong to file an I-129, but your case would be strong as an O1, you could actually file a change of status to O1, which is actually what we've done for one of our E3 clients who absolutely did not want to leave the US, but he really did not have a case that was good for filing an I-129 E3 extension. So what we did was we filed an O1, a change of status to O1 for him instead, so that him and his family didn't have to travel, could remain in the US and could remain working with this employer. So your question was, can you extend an O1 in the US? Yes, if you're in the US, you can file a petition to extend your stay and stay here. The issue is If you then travel internationally, your visa and your passport's expired, so you will need to take into consideration all those considerations that we talked about for E3 in getting your O1 put in your passport. So, you know, where are you going to go do that, and how are you going to do, you know, can you get into the country, can you get back to the country? The O1, like the E3, qualifies for the mail-in. We just had a client who went back to Australia, he was already in O status and needed to get the O visa put in his passport. We managed to do the mail-in for that. You could also try to request an emergency appointment for that too. So there are options there for the O1 that is similar to that E3. We've seen a couple of clients affected with some British expats where got their O1 visas approved. They're in London, and it's been difficult to get their visa put in their passport. It was the first time O1 and they couldn't do a mail-in. So we need to do an emergency appointment. But even if we got an emergency appointment for them, they weren't going to be able to fly back. So they would have to fly back through another country like Mexico or somewhere else where they can. But because of this national interest waiver now, we can try to request for them to be able to travel straight back, or some of those clients have decided to fly somewhere else, do the visa appointment there to then come back into the US from. So that's how it's affecting the O1. And yes, you can extend in the US. Hopefully I answered enough of that.
I've got a really great question here from Anthony in New York. And Anthony, I really like where your head is at right now. Can E3 holders go for a holiday in Europe this summer and then fly back to the US?
If you have a valid E3 visa in your passport to get back in, or if you're prepared to go through renewing it, you know, in one of those countries, you can get back in. Yes, you can get back into the US right now. You just got to determine, can you get into that country and leave that country, and take into consideration if it's Europe. If it's Europe and you have a US citizen spouse or child, go right ahead because you'll be able to get back in. But if you don't qualify for an exemption of those 14 days, you might want to be cautious of where you go based on those travel restrictions we spoke about.
And just to finish up, a question that was asked by two separate individuals, Melita in New York and Paul, who's also US based. They both want to go home to Australia at Christmas. So can you let them know what their options are?
Okay, so I have had this question a little bit. Going home at Christmas time. So I think the overall answer to that is, if you're prepared to go for a month, then, you know, go back to Australia. You know, you're going to have to, the quarantine will still be in effect in December and Christmas time. So you'll have to go to Australia, sit the quarantine. Then you want to consider, will your visa still be valid to be able to get back to the US, or are you going to coincide it with getting the new visa to get back to the US? So if you go there, you're going to be there. If you don't want to spend your whole time in quarantine, you're going to have to be there at least probably a month to make it worth it. So, for example, I won't be going back because I never get to go back for more than 10 to 14 days. So if I went back, I'd spend my whole time in quarantine because I can't be away much longer than that. So, but if you can be away longer and you can be there for a month, then sure, because you get, you know, 2 good weeks or whatever more than that with your family and friends.
On that note, that's a nice reminder that for all of us in the audience tonight, I know in this time of social isolation, you can really feel like you're on your own, but we're all part of a community. And many of the examples that Zjantelle gave of actual cases that she's worked on should suggest to you that you're really not alone. There are people who are in the same situation, and it's great that we have a network where we can help each other. So I'd like to express a heartfelt thanks to Zjantelle, not just for your clarity, but for your upbeat disposition, which I think has brought a lot of comfort during this time of uncertainty and anxiety. If there's anything that you missed or you would like to listen to again, the recording will be up on our website, as well as Zjantelle's slides in the next 24 hours. And I'd like to invite you all to join us again this time next week for our next conversation, which is Australian journalist Jonathan Swan in conversation with the Honourable Joe Hockey, former Australian ambassador to the US, as they have a discussion about the upcoming 2020 presidential election. I invite you to register on our website. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Louisa, and thank you so much for having me. And you know, if anyone has any additional questions, they can feel free to contact me, and I will share my information. It'll be, you know, on your, you know, I'll try and pull it up, but it'll be on your website too. Please feel free to reach out to me, especially if I did not answer your question. Hopefully I did, but we're always there. We love helping the community and all of our Aussie expats that are out there. It's why we love our job.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.